Hello and welcome to JK Paper Presents Author Awards in association with the Times of India. Now, JK Paper and the Times of India have joined hands to bring to you India's most coveted Women Author Awards. The awards are a celebration of contributions of women authors who have, despite all the biases, added value and creativity to this space. The Author Awards will acknowledge and award such women authors so that more and more women take up writing and pen that first story. After a very successful first edition, which saw more than 800 entries across 6 award categories, immersive multi-city book reading sessions, and more than 30 eminent personalities getting associated in the awards journey, JK Paper and the Times of India are back with the second edition of the Author Awards. And today, I'm in conversation with some leading authors to talk about the shift that literature has seen due to the pandemic. Reflection, introspection, and sensibilities. Allow me to introduce my panel. First up, we have Anita Nair, a critically acclaimed and best-selling author. We have Preeti Shenoy. She's considered among the top 5 best-selling novelists of India. Anuja Chauhan, an Indian author, advertiser, and screenwriter. Vinita Nangia, who is the executive editor, columnist, and writer with the Times of India. She's also the festival director of Times Lit Fest and Write India, and the literary director of Author Awards. And finally, Mr. V. Kumaraswamy, CFO, JK Paper, and he's an author also who was featured in the inaugural Bhopal Lit Fest in 2019. Thank you so much for joining me on this panel. I'll start with you, Anita. How has the pandemic impacted the style of writing, your writing, or people that you are talking to, or authors that you are mentoring? How has that impacted the style of writing?
To be very honest, as of now, I don't think we see the impact yet. It's going to take a little while because typically any writer would need a few months for the whole experience to sink into them, and then for it to evolve into a form of fiction. It can take many formats. In fact, I was reading something the other day and I realized that they were talking about how post-pandemic there's going to be this entire whole new genres of fiction that's going to emerge, right from something called conspiracy fiction, which is basically talking about all the conspiracy theories that's going to happen, to something which I thought was rather quaint and cute, called the masked romances, and then of course the very typical commercial category, which would always be about whether the pandemic is something that a group has to crack.
Anuja, the other thing that the pandemic has seen is the growth in the sale of short form content or short reads. Because of the pandemic, people maybe felt it was better to just read shorter books. Do you see that impacting the style of writers for the way ahead? Your thoughts on that part?
Well, I think what has happened is that there was this huge vacuum in all our lives because there were no movies suddenly. You couldn't go out and watch a movie. You couldn't, there was no IPL for the longest time. There were no new TV serials being shot, so it was very strange. We were seeing like Arun Govill's Ramayana after some 30 years and the whole nation was glued to it. The stars themselves were so confused, like, why are we suddenly so important? So I think people were quite starved for new material, and maybe in a twisted, sick kind of way, it was good for us because perhaps people bought more books because books were readily available. And as far as shorter form is concerned or longer formats, I think that could just have something non-pandemic related. And just the fact that people just have shorter attention spans nowadays, and there's still so many other things to compete with, whether it's video games or it's all the other stuff that kids get up to.
Preeti, just wanting to get in your experience on the same kind of question, just how maybe will you see your writing change, or are you seeing the whole space just making a big impact, the pandemic making a big impact on how women writers are writing in India?
Definitely it will affect, because writer is after all a reflection of what's going on in probably their lives, what's going on around them. Obviously it impacts the writer. So there will be an effect on the writing. As regards me personally, I would say, yeah, it did take a huge beating, in the sense that the first 3 months of the pandemic, I just couldn't write. I was just too shocked to see what's happening around me. I mean, I just couldn't comprehend. And then, of course, it was a lockdown, So there was so much housework to do and so many other things which you take for granted. And there simply wasn't time. And then when I started writing, I realized that, it was everywhere you turn. It was this, so many statistics being thrust at you. This many people died, this much happened, this thing happened. And that time, mind you, there was no vaccine in sight, no hope in sight. So I had started posting these little short nuggets of positivity, whatever I could find, some bird chirping or a sunrise and things like that. And then I started posting these little things on Instagram, because easily consumable content, easily created content. And then a lot of people wrote to me saying, why don't you put all this into a book? And I did write a book on positivity, which is being published by HarperCollins. It will be out in a few months. So that was how it impacted my writing. I just couldn't write fiction because the reality was so stark.
Vinita, in your position, with the Times of India and also being the director for these many lit fests, what are some of the kind of books that you have seen come out during the pandemic?
I agree with what Anita said, and Preeti also just now saying that, those are the kind of books that we can look forward to coming out. Initially, as soon as the pandemic struck, everybody goes into a kind of a shell, because suddenly you're faced with something that the world hasn't seen and doesn't know about. So you don't know what's happening, you're scared, and you just internalize that journey and start thinking about life and start thinking about death and, things like that. So you are drawn to a certain kind of a literature which is already there. So we saw a resurgence of books from the past which had been written around crises, times of crisis, books like, written by people like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, his 100 Years of Solitude, or Love in the Time of Cholera, books that spoke about isolation. So there was suddenly a demand for these books, and people started talking about them online as well as to each other. But right now, yes, we've seen a lot of nonfiction emerge in the times of pandemic related to what we are going through. In the field of science, in the field of research, as well as as you said, in the mind health body series, a lot of those help kind of books. But fiction, I think, will take some time to emerge, and I'm looking forward to some really good fiction on this.
Mr. Kumaraswamy, I want to come to you with another trend that we've seen during the pandemic is the rise of ebooks, so to say.
There are a couple of things I want to mention. We should be more bothered about the market size, not the market share between paper or electronics. This pandemic has really exploded both authorship as well as the readership. The authors, like the elite, there's only a place for 11 players on the field in cricket. Like in authorships also, maybe since publishing houses are also willing to publish only the known authors, there was a limit to how many authors there can be on the field. But this electronic medium has really exploded it. In fact, I would call the pandemic time the birth of million authors. May not be 600, 700 page books, but like Anita Preeti said, it's all small nuggets. Maybe 1 page, 2 page experiential notes, or some something about the birds, something what they see, some experiences, those kinds of things. But let me go back to my love for paper books versus electronic. It's nothing to do with the company I work for. When I read a book, actually I am in dialogue with the author. It's not a book or the pages. I am in argument with him. I am agreeing with him. I am disagreeing with him. I am vehemently, agreeing to some points, marking some points. Oh, this is a quotable quote for some other thing. Or I am cross-checking with some other book. I make a note. I make marginal notes, underline, score. These are things which I am unable to do with Kindle. In fact, I bought 38 Kindle books, maybe for came free or some such thing. But I am yet to read 50 pages of Kindle books. Maybe that is something very peculiar with me. And two, the power of this visual memory. In fact, photographs of what you read remain in your memory. But in Kindle, every page is a floating page. You keep on floating, and every page looks the same.
Anita, let's come down to the actual writing bit. Now, again, writing during the lockdown, the process, the thought process has obviously changed. But just curious to know, as for yourself, how do you get down to writing? And how does that process evolve?
I must confess, when the pandemic, began and it was spreading widely, and everybody was complaining about lockdown and not stepping out, etc. And I was just thinking, what's new in my life? Because for the last 20 years, since I actually became like, a published author, I've been in so much of seclusion that it didn't seem like too much of an effort to not go out or, contain my life within the walls of the house. And so usually for me, the writing process begins with an idea and then it stays in my head for quite a long time, which is why I said, there's a germination period for every author, every writer. So there is a germination process that goes on. So when I'm ready to write, then the moment happens, and I'm somebody who still writes longhand, and the quality of the paper is very essential for me. So the way I work is I'm a morning person, so I get up very early in the morning, and I fill my fountain pen first thing in the morning. I write till the ink dries out. So that is how I function.
On that note, it's time for a very short break here on JK Paper Presents Author Awards in association with the Times of India. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to JK Paper Presents Author Awards in association with the Times of India, where I'm in conversation with an esteemed panel of experts who are talking about the shift that literature has seen due to the pandemic: reflection, introspection, and sensibilities. Anuja, I have another question for you. The growth of women authors, and I mean, this initiative, the Author Awards, is also trying to get more and more women authors to the forefront. And the importance of strong women characters, because let's be honest, at this time, the younger generation, or every generation actually, needs to see more stronger women.
As a reader, more than a writer, I just look for books by people I like. When I was younger, growing up, and it was all pre-internet, and I was in boarding school, I didn't even know which of the writers were men and which were women, because I couldn't tell by their names. For the longest time, I thought Daniel Steele was a man because his name was Daniel. And that's how young I was. Enid Blyton, again, we were kids. I didn't know what Enid, was it Ginid? Because it was written, there was a G looking E.
Yeah.
So you had no idea. J.K. Rowling also, when she came along, I wasn't very sure when I just picked up the book. You don't know the gender of the person, and that's how it should be, right? I mean, why do we get into this? Yeah, sure, I get that idea that somebody who is a woman can write with more authority and more insight, obviously, about women, but I'm not very sure that's necessarily true. I think you just need to be, and now the world is getting more and more gender fluid. I don't even know where that leaves things like women's literature, because now there's this whole thing about if you identify as a woman, you can compete as a woman in the in competitive sport in the US. So everything is blurring. So I'm not very sure this whole thing of male literature, female literature, gender fluid literature should be something by which we pick up books as a reader. I mean, going in, I'm not going to go and pick up. They don't even have sections like that in a bookstore, thankfully.
Preeti, I want to get you in on the kind of books that you write. What I mean by that is, when you started off with your first book and now that you are now, as a writer, how do you change with the surroundings around you changing?
So I'll come to that in a minute, but I just want to add one thing to what Anuja said. Now, as a reader, I don't care about the gender of the person who has written the book. I mean, I don't care if a guy has written it, a woman has written it. If the book is interesting, I will pick it up. But having said that, okay, especially in our country, I'm glad that there is a platform like Author Awards, simply because not to segregate the men and the women, simply because in our country, let's face it, about 76 to 78% of the women do not work. Okay, it's very hard for them to go out and write a book and come out in the public eye, let alone promote their work. So I'm glad that a platform like this makes many women's work noticed. Now, coming to your question of how my writing has evolved, oh my God, a world of difference. Like when I look at my first book, I republished it years later because I said, always you evolve with every book you write, So my first book was 34 Bubblegums and Candies. Now that's no longer in the market. Now it is Love a Little Stronger. So I think it has to be a constantly evolving thing. Only then you're growing as a writer. And as regards my characters, I write about the typical Indian woman. So I write very real characters like that. In Rule Breakers, in one of my books, it's a 19-year-old girl, Veda. She lives in a small town, Joshimath. So there is this crazy pressure on her to get married. So I write about such characters, and later how she grows, how she evolves, rest of the story deals with that. So as far as I'm concerned, I write about, very real people with very real problems.
Mr. Kumaraswamy, just wanted to bring you in on, you were earlier mentioning about your next book that's coming up. That's also based on some of your real life experiences. Could you just briefly tell us a little bit about that book?
This book is about the experiential, the nuggets or whatever you call it, based on my, the meetings and conversations with various people of various strata, maybe king, president, to maybe, policemen, pushcart vendors, to maybe pole dancers, everybody. If there is a Agatha Christie or maybe a Sidney Sheldon or Jeffrey Archer, each and every person you meet on the street, they have a story to tell.
Vinita, I want to ask you a very important question. We were discussing this earlier before the show, and wanted to get your thoughts on. You've been seeing a lot of authors. You've helped develop them. Pick out those diamonds from the rough and things like that. How do you feel that male authors write differently from women authors?
There is a difference and there isn't really. And I was just itching to get back to what Anuja said and what Preeti added to it. But I waited my turn. I really want to say this, that what Anuja is saying is an ideal situation, that there should be no difference. I shouldn't bother whether a man has written a book or a woman's written a book. The book reads the same and should be reading the same, more or less. The intellectual capability is the same. And women and men write as good as each other. Today, women write very closely as the man writes, almost the same. And now, because we are being brought up and being given the same privileges as children, as the men are given, as boys are given, girls and boys are being brought up more or less in a similar manner, taught the same values, taught the same obligations and duties, and given the same responsibilities. I think in the future, even that little difference will fade away. There will be no difference.
So, Vinita, before I come to closing comments, but just your thoughts, with you being the literary director for these awards, how is it progressing? How have you seen, the nominations have of course closed and they're across the categories. Just your insights specifically from these awards.
We get, like last year, we got about 800 entries. This year, we got about 1,000 entries, which was very surprising because we were expecting to get much less because of the pandemic. Books, we knew that lesser books have been published this last year than they usually are. Judges are going through the books right now, even as we talk. And every panel of judges is having a very difficult time selecting the top 10 and then the top 3 out of that category and the one that gets the award.
But just for closing comments, I'll start with you, Anita. Two-pronged question, actually. One is your favorite author, a woman author, not yourself, of course, somebody else. And just your thoughts, for your advice to budding authors watching this. What's your advice to them?
I think I would go with Anne Proulx. The lady who wrote Shipping News and Brokeback Mountain, etc. Yeah. And my advice for young writers, aspiring writers, is write. Because, every now and then we are running into people. I'm sure every writer meets half a dozen people at least a week who tell them that, I really want to write this book. I want to start writing this book. And the book doesn't get written on its own unless you can actually write, and you have to treat it as seriously as you would treat any other art form.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Anita. I'll come to you, Anuja. Same 2 questions, a favorite woman author and your advice to budding authors out there.
My advice to budding authors is very much what Anita's saying, and is that just write the book, don't do other things. As far as a favorite, awards for everybody. I think my dream for this award is that it becomes so good that finally we let the boys enter as well. That's my ambition for that here. As far as favorite female writers are concerned, not that that's a lens I like to put on, but I love Toni Morrison. And I think she writes brilliantly about women. And those are books that are rereadable. And for me, being rereadable is the biggest compliment I give to any writers, that I go back to you again and again and I reread.
Preeti, just closing comments, your thoughts. Same, your favorite woman author and your advice to budding authors out there.
Again, extremely difficult for me to pick because there are so many women authors I read. Very difficult. Probably I'd go with Christine Hanna because I love her work, especially The Nightingale. Absolutely blew me away. And my advice to new writers and especially women would be: do not bother about what everybody will think of you when you write. Because that's one thing which my readers ask me a lot. I'm writing this, but what will my aunt think? What will my relative think? What if they think I'm writing about them? And of course, read a lot. Only if you read will your writing improve. Read, read, read.
Vinita, your closing comments, same, your favorite author and your favorite woman author and advice.
Yeah. So favorite woman author, every woman's favorite woman author, Jane Austen, definitely. Charlotte Bronte, definitely. I find myself going back again and again to them, no matter what I read, hear, see, experience, always go back to them. So my advice to those who are writing, and I keep meeting a lot of them as part of my work as well, is do not write to be a bestseller. I find that this generation of authors is all writing because they ask me, how can I be a bestseller?
Yeah.
Nobody asks me, how can I be an author or how can I write?
Wow.
Do not write to be a bestseller. Do not write even to be published. Just write because you cannot help writing. You just feel that need. It comes from within you. Use it as a means of expressing yourself. And read others. Read so much that you feel tempted to write like that.
Wow, so beautifully put, Vinita. Thank you. And finally, Mr. Kumaraswamy, coming to you for your closing comments as we wrap up this panel. Your thought.
I will, skip the first part of the questions. I don't want to be taking sides and risking it. The second part of the question I'll answer. I think my advice for every budding author, is try to express yourself rather than trying to impress with high-sounding words and flabbergasting, situations and trying to cook up two very complicated.
Well, that's all the time that we have on the panel today. Thank you so much, Anita, Preeti, Anuja, Vinita, and Mr. Kumaraswamy for being a part of this panel. You've been watching JK Paper Presents Author Awards in association with the Times of India, and stay tuned to the channel for more information about the awards. Thank you so much for watching.